the Republic of Estonia over the last nearly 2 years under a program called the Foundational Infrastructure for Responsible Use of Small Modular Reactor Technologies. It's a mouthful, summarized as FIRST program. This is a U.S. Department of State program, and want to do a little bit of an overview of what our collaborative work has been with the Nuclear Energy Working Group starting in 2023 and then advancing here into 2025 and beyond. So first, I'll just describe what is the FIRST program. So the FIRST program is a U.S. Department of State program, as I mentioned, that provides capacity building support to partner countries, exploring the potential for small modular reactors and other advanced reactor technologies to meet their energy security needs with secure and safe nuclear power. And there's several missions within that idea, and I highlighted 2 of those missions that are particularly important with our collaboration and work in Estonia. So first of all, support establishment of a nuclear power program under the highest international standards for nuclear safety, security, and non-proliferation. And I'll describe exactly what that has meant here in Estonia over the last nearly 2 years. And also to enable Estonia to meet their reliable energy goals. Also, I'll just interject if anyone has questions, please interrupt. I'm happy to field those as we go. So first, I want to give a little brief overview of who Sargent Lundy is, just so you understand where we come from and why we've been working here in Estonia. So first of all, Sargent Lundy was founded in 1891. We have been a global industry leader in all energy sectors. You can see here some of our business groups. Under Power Generation Group, we have a nuclear power division. We also do grid work, industrial facility development, renewables. We have a consulting services that does kind of banks and due diligence reviews, and then a government services division that works with the U.S. Department of Energy, Department of Defense, et cetera. So you can see we're headquartered in Chicago, Illinois, primarily focused within the U.S. market, but expanding globally and been working globally for decades. And here's just some of our statistics just from a global perspective on top 100, top 50 company in the world supporting these types of services. Within nuclear power, so we've been really from the infancy of civil nuclear power in the U.S. From 1954, we've been supporting civil nuclear power. So over 70 years. This is really across the entire life cycle of nuclear power project development. From the conceptual planning phases all the way through maintenance and operations of those plants. I'll just provide one boundary as S&L is an engineering firm. We're an architectural engineering firm only. We do not do construction services directly, so we aren't turning wrenches, turning bolts, doing things in the field, but we are supporting field work throughout the nuclear project life cycle. Within the Department of State FIRST program, I'll just describe briefly kind of the portfolio of work we're doing. So we are working in a total of 13 partner countries within that program, doing feasibility studies primarily of different flavors. So we are following IAEA best guidance for feasibility studies. This includes site assessments, technology assessments, licensing overviews and regulatory infrastructure, including codes and standards assessments, economic analysis, and then project delivery schemes. So let's focus in on Estonia now. So what have we been doing here over the past nearly 2 years? The primary goal, and this was the goal statement we established in October of 2023 when the program just started, was to ready the Republic of Estonia to establish a civil nuclear safety regulatory body. That was the overarching goal. So that has been the primary focus of our support and collaboration over this period. This was to support and advance the Nuclear Energy Working Group's goals and priorities, and to benchmark with other regulatory bodies and identify best practices to ensure that there's a right-size regulator to enable Estonia's energy goals and policies. Here in the picture is just one of those reports that the Republic of Estonia produced. This was part of their IAEA milestone approach. This was really the conclusion of their phase 1 analysis, which was then independently reviewed by IAEA through an INR mission and endorsed really with some good next steps. I think many of you all maybe heard that earlier today. So really we've been in 2 phases of work here in Estonia. Phase 1, which was majorly done in calendar year 2024 was we worked to develop a future regulatory authority policy manual. And that policy manual really collaborated with the Nuclear Energy Working Group here to identify the vision, mission, and goals of this future regulator, to start outlining what the organizational structure would be built around based on benchmarking. Talk about document management systems, right? This management of a large volume of paperwork. We all know this about nuclear is paperwork is one of those never-ending bits of fun. How we want to stay organized, how the public can have trust, right, that the regulator is performing its regulatory duties appropriately, and then we can search and see that through the system. We also outlined some of the regulatory agencies' process descriptions, and then outlined this culture of continual improvement, right? So this culture of nuclear safety culture, always having continual improvement, being able to challenge norms and ensure nuclear safety in the end. Okay, so phase 2, and this is the phase we're in right now, is a two-step phase. One is a feasibility study phase, and the other is a technical advisory services phase. So I'll focus on the feasibility study phase first. So IAEA NG-T-3.3 is the guidance for preparation of a feasibility study for new nuclear power plants. And what I highlighted here are those topics which we plan to focus on here in Estonia, right? Estonia has a model that's going to very much be similar to the U.S. model, right, where we're going to have private investment bringing nuclear projects to the government for the regulator to review and ultimately license, and then provide regulatory oversight. And so there are certain topics that we want to approach from a government perspective, right, is whether that's capacity building, what does it mean to do some of these topics, versus then what kind of role the government here in Estonia may have in enabling these different ideas. So one thing is electrical system analysis, right? How would an SMR integrate into the electrical system now in Estonia? And then what does that future roadmap look like based on energy growth here? We're going to talk and support the siting process here, right? So that process is just starting to do, and we're going to provide the nuclear, I call it maybe flavor to this siting process, right? So since there is not an established regulator, the current siting framework doesn't include any nuclear specific requirements, but they should be considered as this process begins here. Another one is nuclear technology overview. So we're going to start providing some capacity building training on different nuclear technologies. What are light water reactors, right? Boiling water reactors versus pressurized water reactors, just some very basic, and then try to get more and more specific, even down to training based on publicly available information of the GE Hitachi BWRX 300 technology kind of nuances. So that the future regulator is aware of what is unique about the GE design. And then we'll be exploring other technologies as the working group requests to provide them information about other technologies, as I said. Obviously, we're focusing a lot on licensing and authorization. We're also going to be talking about project implementation approach, so different ownership models, different deployment models, different contractual models, just as an awareness of how different projects around the world have approached deploying that nuclear technology. National participation, right? So how can the existing local capabilities in Estonia be leveraged within the future project, right? What are regional capabilities that can be leveraged? And then also what are international, more broadly international capabilities that can be leveraged within the project? Similar to that is this organizational human resources and training, right? It's kind of building off of the idea of universities and some of their programs and highlighting areas that those programs can be leveraged, or maybe places where those programs may need to grow. A lot about economic analysis and funding and financing, right? This is kind of based off best available public information. We're not going to be sourcing any private or sensitive information directly from GE as a part of this, but it's more like an LCOE type of analysis and basic economic analysis, but interacting just through some of these different funding and financing models, how import-export banks could potentially be a part of that, how different governments around the world have been a part of or not a part of different projects, and why some of those are the pros, cons, and risks of those different funding and financing models. Stakeholder communication is going to be a major focus here. Actually, we're going to be back here soon to do a workshop on stakeholder communication, basically to interface with the Estonian communication strategy, basically to promote and advocate for this future nuclear program. Emergency preparedness and response within the site. It's a lot about site security, obviously emergency preparedness activities. So just start doing capacity building about what this means. And then also decommissioning. And decommissioning is really about spent fuel and nuclear waste. So there's going to be a focus on what are different long-term waste storage solutions, whether that's on-site storage, whether that's maybe deep borehole technology storage, what are different approaches to nuclear waste storage that are market ready or possible here in Estonia. So the other part of this is technical advisory services. So the technical advisory services is really continuing to build off of that first phase work with the nuclear policy manual. So there's a couple focus here. One is what does independent mean for regulator, right? An idea, so what is definitionally, what does independent mean? What are some different options for how the regulator can exist within existing ministries or as separate, and provide some pros, cons, and risks of those different organizational setups. Additionally, identify some of the primary regulatory functions through each phase of the licensing process. And then also focus a lot on staffing needs of the regulator, right? So how are the different skill sets needed during different licensing phases, the number of staff, and how that staffing approach may change, right? So who do you need to have as long-term staff with certain skill sets, and who maybe you could contract as a technical support through like a technical support organization to support different licensing reviews. So this next one, I'm not going to go in detail. This is a very high-level outline of what an example organizational structure may look like for a future regulator. We've been discussing actually just this week much detail of exactly who would be within each group, what are the core functions, what are the core roles and responsibilities, and how these different pieces of the organization would be interacting, and what we need to be thinking about, what is the nearest term needs from that staffing, and then what can be weighted to a little bit later into the project development phase. And really this next slide just reemphasizes that same point, right? So there's different phases. So there's phases consistent with the IAEO milestone approach, and we have to have decisions regarding staffing for this future regulator to really intercept these different major milestones in the project. So I've been pretty quick here, so maybe you all like that. But last slide here, and then happy to open it up for questions. But conclusions, really, what have we learned is a really good model. So one is to have good partners, right? I think Estonia has good partners. I think you're collaborating well internationally and domestically to get the right stakeholders in the room. That's why we're having events like this today. Guides, so IAEA guides and standards are a great reference point for Estonia as they move through their decision-making process. Expertise, so right, bringing in these right individual experts, these right subject matter experts to help you understand what different options analysis means, and then really focus. So this Nuclear Energy Working Group, right, it's a dedicated team focused on enabling the future of Estonia, right? Fermi is a dedicated company focused on the future project deployment here in Estonia. So having this focus will really lead with all these other piece parts really to a successful project here in the future in Estonia. So with that, I will open it up for questions. And I've also got some of the other Sargent Lundy team members here that I may pass off to if any nuanced questions I can't handle. So yeah, please, any questions or comments? Yeah.
Should I have the mic?
Sure.
Recording. Yeah. Thank you for your presentation. What do you see currently, like where you should, or where you are putting the most effort, and what are the, let's say, biggest challenges here, like establishing a regulatory framework or regulatory body in Estonia?
Yeah. So, I don't know if this is on.
It's
Is this
working.
on? Okay, perfect. Okay. So it's a very loaded question there because there's so many avenues.
time.
We can go anywhere. Maybe
have time.
we spend the next few days together on this. But really what our focus has been primarily of late has been definitionally what does a future regulator need to fulfill? What is its key mission and roles? And how then does the organizational structure of that future regulator need to support those roles and goals? So in the end, what do we want? We want safe operation of a nuclear power plant. That is what we need. Like the public demands it, right? We owe it to the public to give them that. So regardless of any nuances within how that works, that is the overarching mission. And so we need to make sure that the future regulator can be viewed and seen through the definitional lenses of independent, right? We need to ensure that they have the ability to basically control the outcomes of their decisions and rulings to ensure nuclear safety and public safety, right? So that's been a lot of the discussions is nuances on this, like if this, then what, if that, then what, and that's really been the focus of our conversations this week and really of the last couple weeks within the program. And really then we're out of this conversation, I think we're ready to launch into the rest of the subject matters within the feasibility study that I outlined today. But really, I think the rest of this calendar year is focused on what does this regulator look like and to enable budgeting, right, to enable planning as Estonia develops their laws, right, and then hopefully by the end of 2026, we have approval of those laws, and then the regulator is ready to launch in 2027. So I hope that answered your question.
Thank you.
Is there any questions?
Perfect.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Des. Okay, next program is BWX 300 update from the. Oh, yeah, one more question. Oh.
Yeah.
It works. Yeah.
No.
Microphone.
Maybe I use this. So, first part is a comment to Josh and Sargent Lundy colleagues. So we definitely are really happy with you. You have provided very valuable help to us with our program. So thank you for that. But the second part is the question. So would like to know whether some other country is in the same spot as we are, and also considering this model that we are considering that the financing of the power plant is actually done from the private sector. So you mentioned in US it's the same way, but we are talking here about SMRs.
Right.
So maybe some comments on that, if
Yeah.
possible.
It's a great question. Do you have some feedback on this too? Yeah, actually, I'm going to pass it over to one of our SNL colleagues, John Michael, who's been leading some of this discussion. So please.
So Antti, just to reiterate, the question is about private sector financing versus state-backed financing. Yeah, I would say I don't have a lot to say on this except that this is a discussion that's kind of paramount in every region with prospective, nuclear power plants, and I think it's pretty undecided in most places. I think a lot of the goal of much of the industry is to, and some countries and regulators and regulatory setups is to enable private sector financing, but it's still pretty unclear whether that's going to happen everywhere. And it's kind of, I think one thing to keep an eye on is some of the demonstration projects that are going to be happening in a couple of countries, especially the United States and Canada and possibly the UK over the next couple of years, which are really going to, and some of those are kind of state-backed. So those follow-on projects could possibly unlock a lot of private sector financing. So keep an eye out.
And I'll just add to that. really depends on the country, right, and the model that they're used to. So those that are ex-Soviet bloc countries that have existing technologies, right, that Rosatom in particular is continuing to service, have a certain model in their mind. So they think it's a turnkey model that the technology provider will bring everything, a part of one package, and just deploy it and be ready to support it. Where a Western model, maybe more US-based model, is that it becomes a consortium of different suppliers, right, and different contract elements for that deployment. So you have the technology provider, you'll have the EPC, you'll have owner's engineering, right, you'll have different supply chain, local and foreign. And so in countries, it really depends on what their entering model is. And I think in Estonia, right, you have a very strong model for not having government necessarily be the owner of these projects, right, and that private brings the opportunities and the government enables those opportunities, right, where in other countries it is the governments or the states drive all of this from the start. So we have complete opposite end spectrum of the conversations depending on which country we're supporting. And the first program is within these wide bandwidth of countries that have these different entering models. So what we try to do is navigate from where those countries see what they want it to be, and then say, okay, if that, here are some different options for financing and funding and ownership structures that can enable that model versus in other countries, the opposite model. So I say we want to be strong collaborators with countries and not facilitating one model over another throughout how we execute the program. So that helps at all.